Arrival of the Horseless Carriage in Bennington, Nebraska, a presentation of the Bennington Historical Society. The horseless carriage was the name given to early automobiles manufactured from 1896 through 1915, making these cars over 100 years old. This period is also called the automobile brass era, named for the large amount of shiny brass used for lights, radiators, and other accessories. These are really beautiful and classic cars that represent the transition of American society from the horse to the machine era. We're going to discuss the arrival of the horseless carriage in Bennington, and we'll get a tour of the Ford Model T by one of the Society's members, Mr. Robert McKelvey. So let's get cranking. The streets of Bennington were dominated by horses and buggies during the late 1800s. This photo shows a 4th of July parade heading south on Stark Street about 1890. These folks were undoubtedly going to Bunn's Park to celebrate the holiday. Cars hadn't arrived yet. Just outside this photograph to our left was Bert Seymour's blacksmith shop. Bert had a growing business of shoeing horses and repairing buggies and horse-drawn farm equipment. To the extreme right, you can just see Off's livery stable. That's where folks kept their horses. The Transcontinental Railroad laid tracks from Omaha through Elkhorn, Valley, Fremont, and points west in the mid-1860s. The locomotive appeared in Bennington in 1889 with the completion of the Chicago and Northwestern tracks that connected Arlington to Irvington. Bennington was actually created by the railroad. Those railroads eventually brought large steam-operated tractors which gradually replaced horsepower on farms. These machines could do more work, do it more cheaply, and often faster. These were generally big, heavy, and cumbersome machines. Here's a team and wagon that were hauling water that was needed to replenish the tractor's boiler. Engineers were busy trying to develop a mechanized method of transportation on our early roads. Some of the earliest and fastest horseless carriage were powered by steam. The main drawback with steam power was that if you wanted to go anywhere, you first had to wait until a car had built up enough steam to propel itself, and that took time. However, so did catching, harnessing, and hooking up a buggy. The advent of the internal gasoline engine eliminated that wait. You simply could start it and drive off. Here's a photo of our beloved town doctor, C.W. Hickey, and his family in his new Stanley Steamer automobile. He traded in his buggy and team for good. Dr. Hickey practiced medicine in Bennington from 1907 through 1957, a remarkable 50 years. It isn't known when the first horseless carriage appeared in Bennington, but it was probably shortly after 1900. A sales district was created in Omaha on Farnham Street, and by 1906 it was the prime location for car sales in this entire area. It had 5 exclusive dealerships at that time. At its peak, more than 60 different car manufacturers were sold and repaired in that area. And these included Ford, Buick, Fiat, Cadillac, Humpmobile, Hudson, and Pierce Arrow. This photo was taken prior to 1913 of Bert Seymour's blacksmith shop, and his shop was located where the back parking lot of the Stumble Inn is. This photo was probably taken of a car club touring the countryside. There is at least 8 horseless carriages parked in front of Bert's shop. Early cars were prone to break down, and there were very few garages and gas stations. The first gas station didn't arrive in Bennington until 1923. Blacksmiths found themselves being asked to repair and service these new contraptions, and undoubtedly started offering fuel. As time went on, many became car dealerships. Engineers experimented with steam power, battery power, but eventually the internal combustion gasoline engine won out. Governments worldwide began to promote and encourage the development of more practical forms of transportation that didn't include horses. For example, the state of Wisconsin in 1875 offered a $10,000 award to the first vehicle that could maintain an average speed of more than 5 miles per hour over a 200-mile course. The offer led to the first city-to-city automobile race in the United States. The race started on July 16, 1879 in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and ended in Madison. 7 vehicles registered, but only 2 started the race. 1 vehicle broke down before completing, but the other finished the 201-mile course in 33 hours, posting an average speed of 6 miles per hour, which won. Today we can travel that same distance by car in less than 3 hours. The arrival of the automobile had its physical altercations too. Horses were often spooked by these strange and noisy machines. Occasionally there were accidents, such as this one located just west of Bennington. John Peterson had possibly the earliest and definitely the largest garage and dealership in town. His business was located on the south side of Main Street, where the Nelson Apartments are located. It was a large 2-story building where they serviced and sold cars. This photo was taken in 1914 and it shows John on the phone. A pair of Siamese calves are prominently displayed for the curious. The large posters display new cars which were probably brought in from Omaha on the railroad. Bennington also had a Ford dealership on Stark and Warehouse Street. It was called the Bennington Motor Company, and it was located on the south side of South Stark. From our research, at least 4 different brands of cars were sold in Bennington. We know the Peterson garage sold the Grant 6, Maxwell, Studebaker, Ford, and possibly others. And we know the Bennington Motor Company sold Fords. As you can see from these early advertisements, the price of these cars ranged from $600 to $800. The number of automobile manufacturers exploded after 1950. Over 100 were in business by 1917, and here are a few. These include the Auburn, the Bell, the Bush, the Chalmers, Cole, the Dixie, the Hudson, the Metz, the Monitor, the Moon, the Pullman, the Packard, and even the Mobilette. Those surviving to today include the Ford, the Chevrolet, the Cadillac, Buick, and Oldsmobile. The early automobile provided an economic and practical method of travel for nearly everyone. The focus was on travel and certainly not on personal comfort, which would come later. For example, you had to crank the motor by hand to get it started. You simply couldn't turn a key or push a button. Horseless carriages were open to the elements. Their sides were open, and if they had a front windshield, it seldom kept out the rain. If they had lights, they were dim and fueled by lamp oil or carbide gas, and you actually had to get out of your car and light them with a match. In some, they were only kerosene. These cars didn't have a heater, no air conditioning, no defroster, no windshield wipers, no radio, and often little or no trunk or storage area. But they were faster and more comfortable than a horse. The motor vehicle changed Bennington and the world. Distances that took days to travel now takes hours or even minutes. We ride in complete comfort. Trucks have replaced the railroad, which created Bennington. Can you imagine life today without the automobile? Now let's take a closer look at a horseless carriage. One of the most notable was Henry Ford's Model T. The Model T revolutionized the automobile industry by becoming the first car or the first anything built on an assembly line. That led to mass production. Between 1909 and 1927, he built 15.5 million Model Ts. They went all over the world. Bennington has a renowned Model T expert and collector, Mr. Robert McKelvey, and Bob has agreed to show us his cars and explain how they work. Bob.
Folks, I'd like to introduce you to Bob McKelvey. Bob is Mr. Model T here in this part of the country, and he's going to tell us about some of his cars that he has here in Bennington. Bob?
Yeah, Gordon. This car is a 1910 Ford touring car. This car was sold new in Omaha at the Ford branch in downtown Omaha, Harney Street. The car is, well, was shipped to Omaha. By the UP Railroad in those years to the dealership, not dealership, but the Ford branch. As far as I know, there wasn't a dealer in Omaha in 1910. This car has a wood body made by a company called Pontiac, and wood wheels, of course, and they're made by a company called Pruden. A lot of the parts on this car are made by Dodge Brothers. This is pretty early in Ford's life. I've had this car myself for 30 years. And the ball horn is a large brass ball horn. The headlights are Edmunds and Jones, and they're carbide. They're operated by this tank here. You put in carbide pellets and water, and they mix to form a gas which travels through this hose up to the lights, and then you light them with a match, kind of like you would your barbecue grill. You want to do it pretty quick as the gas is going. The side lights are Edmunds and Jones, and they're kerosene as well as the tail light. These are to operate the car. This is the spark advance and retard. Fully up is retarded, down advances it. So to start the car, you want it retarded so it won't kick back, and give it some gas or throttle over here. Be sure it's in neutral, this hand lever. Go around to the front of the car, remove the crank from the holder, and away you go. 14 has a choke pull rod out here. This carburetor on a 10 has a piece inside that you push down to sink the float to get more gas in the carburetor. And then, like the other cars, you just pull up and it should respond. Anything else we didn't? Oh, the inside of the car is leather, and it's stuffed with horsehair. With the original horsehair, incidentally, was saved and put back in here when they were recovered. It's diamond tufted, and it's not sewn, it's folded wet. It's quite a job to do that. You gotta really know what you're doing to do it. Basically, Gordon. Okay, Gordon, I think this gives you a better angle of the controls that we talked about earlier. As you can see, this is on this top here on the left side is the spark advance and retard, and over here being the throttle. This is the coil box. Switch starts magneto. Once it's running, battery. Once it's running, go back to the magneto. Here's where it helps if you can tap dance, because most of the driving with this car is done with your feet. The three pedals being the outside right one is the brake, the middle one is reverse, and the outside left one is the two speeds, low and high. The car needs to be in neutral to start it. Straight up and down is being neutral without having the parking brake set. Once the car is running, you need to hold it in neutral with your left foot and bring this lever forward and then push down for low gear and let it all the way out for high gear. You just use low gear basically to get the car, oh, maybe 50 feet or so, just moving and then get into high gear. Give it a little more gas and away you go. Gordon, a lot of people come into the building and look at the cars, and of course they want to see the engine. When you open the hood on a car, you really can't see it as well as this display engine here. This is a 1918 Model T engine. You can't see the pedals very well, but you've seen them on the other cars, which are the same. This is the exhaust manifold. It carries out the pipe to the muffler, the carburetor, the hot pipe for the carburetor, the intake manifold, and where this right here is a choke where the rod would run out to the front pull, and basically that's the transmission's back here. It's all connected together. This engine does turn over, but it doesn't run, and you can see what the crank does when you're able to start it. This is the oil filler cap, the fan belt, the adjustment for the tightness on the fan belt, and down here is the timer, the distributor, and of course the spark plugs on the starter head. Basically, that's the best way to look at a motor, because it's virtually impossible to see one inside the car, so everything's so close together. Yeah, Gordon, we have here a 1914 Ford Runabout. Runabout being that it's a one-seated car, where the touring cars have a front and back seat. This one only has a front seat. The difference between this and the 10, as you can see, is a lot more steel on the lights instead of all brass. It's about half and half, but there's still, the headlights are still carbide, and the side lights and tail light are kerosene. Still has the narrow wheels for tires in front, the 30x3s and 30x3.5 in the rear. This car is number 423,000. So you can see how many cars were made between 10 and 14, where the 10 was a 26,000 car. Anything else that we need to? This is a good example of what happened in 7 years after the 1914. This is a 21 Runabout. I've owned this car for 60 years. It was sold new in Joplin, Missouri. And it's just a sweet little car. It's got, of course, it's got a starter. You don't have to crank it. And it's a great driver. There were so many people in the 20s that made things, different things for cars. That promoted so many jobs, aftermarket accessories and things. Like this steering wheel, it's an anti-theft. By turning this key, it freewheels and no one can take your car away from the curb. And it's got the same system with the spark advance on the left side and the throttle. The lights are now all black and everything is all steel. The fenders are crowned, and the radiator is raised up to help manage some of the heat, and it still has heat problems. The hood is vented, just several different things. The wheels are now demountable. It's just quite an improvement, and these cars were like this from 1917 to 22. It's almost impossible to tell the difference in them. And then the 23, 4s, and 5s were identical. And then the 26 and 27 were just some minor differences. And then, of course, he went into making a Model A. It was 15 million cars from 1909 to 27. I think in 1 year in the 20s, not this year, but in the 23 or 4, somewhere in there, he sold 2 million cars in 1 year. So it's quite an accomplishment. He definitely put the country on wheels. There's no question about that. It's hard for me to see why anybody who had a car collection, no matter how old they are or good they are, could have any kind of a car collection without having a Model T. It's just such an important part of, I think, of our history, and it's history that you can play with. So
Bob, Ford was known for economizing, and I noticed that in this and your other cars, there's not a driver's door. Can you tell us some of the ways he saved money?
yeah, that was one way, I think. I've been told that the radiator had 5 rows of tubes. I don't know how many, 3 rows of so many tubes across. I don't remember the exact number, but in the cars that went north, he eliminated some of those tubes to save money. But when you're talking about millions of cars being made, a dime here and a dime there is an awful lot of money. It comes out to, you know. So there were several things that just comes to my mind now. The radiator and every nut and bolt on these cars from 9 to 27 has got a cotter pin through the nut. And almost from the beginning, a lot of the parts were marked Dodge Brothers DB, and almost everything on this car, no matter how minute it is stamped Ford. He had suppliers who supplied him with parts. He specified the size the box would be made, and he used the box for floorboards. Ford was very thrifty, and you know, he made money, and he just didn't waste money.
Bob, thank you very much for showing us your cars.
It was fun. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Riley.
Riley missed out on the whole thing.